Barry Gibb never liked to talk about it, but when he did, his voice changed. It wasn't guilt exactly, it was something quieter, something heavier. The kind of weight a man carries when he knows the truth will never sound as simple as people want it to. For decades, fans have asked the same question: what really happened between Barry and Robin Gibb? How did two brothers who built one of the greatest harmonies in pop history end up breaking that harmony in real life? The tabloids called it ego, reporters called it pride, but those who were closest called it something else, a Cold War that never truly ended. By 1969, the Bee Gees were everywhere. Hit records, television specials, sold-out tours. They had everything a band could dream of. But inside the studio, something had begun to shift. The laughter was quieter, the takes lasted longer, and the silences between Barry and Robin grew thick enough to touch. They still sang together, but there was something unspoken hiding beneath those harmonies, a question neither one of them dared to ask. Who really leads this band? Fans didn't see it then, but insiders did. There were arguments about which songs should be singles, disagreements over who should sing lead, and subtle glances during recording sessions, the kind that say more than words ever could. Barry was the older brother, the steady hand, the perfectionist. Robin was the dreamer, unpredictable, emotional, a voice that could sound like a prayer or a cry, depending on the day. Their chemistry made magic, until it didn't. The story everyone remembers begins in early 1969, when Robin walked out, right in the middle of what should have been their biggest year. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't an exaggeration. It happened, but the reason has never been clear. Some say it started when Barry's voice began to dominate the group's singles, that the producers and label favored him for his radio sound. Others insist Robin felt betrayed, that he'd been promised an equal role, only to be slowly pushed aside. And then there's the third version, whispered among old producers and road crew members, that one night, a small argument in the control room turned personal, that Robin accused Barry of caring more about control than music, and Barry said something he could never take back. No one remembers the words, only the silence that followed. The next morning, Robin was gone. He didn't tell Barry, didn't tell Maurice, he just left. Within weeks, headlines were everywhere. Robin Gibb quits Bee Gees. The press ate it up. One brother forming his own band, the other vowing to continue without him. But behind the glossy magazine covers, something darker was happening. Both men were unraveling. Barry tried to hold the Bee Gees together with what was left. He gave interviews pretending nothing was wrong, calling the split temporary, as if saying it out loud would make it true. But insiders described him as tense, distracted, angry. There were stories of him locking himself in the studio for hours, replaying takes until dawn, insisting that perfection was the only way to prove the Bee Gees could survive without Robin. For Robin, the separation was supposed to be liberation, a solo career, a new sound, his own identity, but it didn't feel that way. He gave interviews calling Barry controlling. He said he'd been treated like a background singer in his own band, and his new songs, especially Saved by the Bell, sounded less like triumph and more like heartbreak. Even the title said it all, a cry for rescue, disguised as success. Then came the interviews that made fans choose sides. Robin told Melody Maker magazine that the Bee Gees had become Barry's band, that he'd felt trapped by his brother's leadership, that it was time to stand on his own. Barry, meanwhile, said nothing directly. He smiled through questions, gave polite answers, and let his silence speak louder than any denial. But those who knew him say that silence wasn't pride, it was hurt, because Barry wasn't just being criticized as a musician, he was being rejected as a brother. As months went by, the rift grew colder. The Bee Gees, or what was left of them, kept touring. Robin's solo career gained momentum, and for the first time, the world was hearing two Gibbs on opposite sides of the same dream. It was like watching two reflections arguing in the same mirror, each convinced the other was the one who'd walked away. Backstage stories from that time are filled with contradictions. Some say Barry tried to call Robin dozens of times, that Robin refused to answer. Others claim Barry sent messages through Maurice, begging him to keep the family together, but Robin reportedly told friends, Barry doesn't want brothers, he wants soldiers. It was cruel, but it came from pain, because deep down both men were terrified of the same thing, that they weren't as powerful apart as they were together. And yet pride has a way of convincing us otherwise. Barry buried himself in work, Robin buried himself in interviews, both pretending the other didn't matter, while the world watched the most famous brotherhood in pop fall apart in slow motion. And the strangest part, no one, not even Maurice, seemed to know the real reason. The few who were in the studio that final night never forgot the atmosphere. They said it wasn't anger that filled the room, it was heartbreak, the quiet kind, the kind that sits between people who still love each other but don't know how to speak anymore. Fans still argue about that night. Some swear they heard Barry call Robin unreliable. Others claim Robin said, "You think you're the Bee Gees." The truth has blurred into legend, and maybe that's how they both wanted it, because to admit what really happened would mean admitting that pride had destroyed something sacred, Robin wouldn't rejoin the Bee Gees until years later, but by then, something had changed. The music was still beautiful, but it no longer came from the same place. There was a distance in their smiles, a kind of fragile peace built on what they never spoke of again. And through it all, Barry never addressed the fight directly, not once. When asked about it decades later, he simply said, "Brothers fight. Ours just happened to be on tape." But fans never stopped wondering what really happened behind that studio door. Was it jealousy, pride, or something else entirely? Because if you listen closely, beneath every Bee Gees harmony, you can still hear it. That faint tension, the sound of love trying not to sound like pain. By the time 1970 arrived, the rumor had stopped being a rumor. Barry and Robin Gibb weren't just fighting, they were at war. But it wasn't the kind of war with shouting or punches, it was colder than that. A quiet, suffocating kind of tension that followed them everywhere, on stage, in the studio, and even in interviews. When the Bee Gees recorded, the energy used to be electric. Three brothers, three voices blending so perfectly you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. But now people noticed something strange. Barry and Robin no longer shared a microphone. They recorded separately, sometimes even on different days. Their harmonies still matched, but the warmth was gone. The laughter, the inside jokes replaced by silence. Producers later said they could feel it in the room. One described it like this: when Barry was behind the glass, Robin would look away, and when Robin sang, Barry stared at the floor. They didn't argue, they just didn't exist in the same moment. The press started asking questions, and both brothers gave polite, measured answers, the kind you give when you're trying to hide the truth. Barry said things like, "Robin's doing his own thing, and that's good for him." Robin said, "I'm not leaving forever, just taking a break." But the bitterness leaked through the smiles. Each new interview added fuel to the fire. The tabloids called it the Battle of the Brothers, and maybe that wasn't far from the truth. Fans began noticing small things. Album credits that once read, "Written by Barry, Robin, and Maurice Gibb," suddenly read, "Written by Barry Gibb." Certain photos cropped Robin out of frame. Publicists denied it was intentional, but it didn't feel accidental either. Behind closed doors, Barry had become the de facto leader, the man the record label trusted to deliver hits, the voice that executives said sounded more commercial. Robin hated that word. He didn't want to be commercial. He wanted to be honest, but honesty was dangerous when money was on the line. And in that tension, art versus control, the brotherhood began to collapse. Some of the studio engineers claimed that the air felt charged, that even the smallest note or suggestion could ignite something between them. One night, while recording vocals for a ballad, Robin apparently refused to sing the harmony line Barry suggested. He said it didn't feel right. Barry insisted it was essential. The take stopped, the lights dimmed, and Robin left the room without saying a word. He didn't return for 2 days. Maurice tried to keep the peace. The mediator, the glue that held them together. He told friends he felt like the referee in a war of pride. He loved both of them, but he knew the truth. Neither brother could truly win because both were too afraid to lose to each other. When they were young, they'd promised they'd never let fame come between them. But fame doesn't break promises. It just tests how long you can keep them. There's an old story from a studio tech who worked during the sessions for Cucumber Castle, the first Bee Gees project without Robin. He said Barry came in one morning, exhausted but determined, and told the crew, "We move forward, no looking back." They started recording without him. But halfway through a track, Barry stopped, looked toward the empty microphone where Robin would normally stand, and said quietly, "It doesn't sound the same." No one responded. They all just kept working. Because they knew Barry didn't want sympathy. He wanted control, and control was all he had left. Meanwhile, across London, Robin was recording his solo album. He filled it with orchestras, choirs, and lyrics that felt almost spiritual. But between the lines, you could hear the bitterness. In one interview, he said, "When you grow up being compared to your brother, you start to forget who you are." He was proud of his new music, but it didn't bring him peace. He'd lost his family's unity, and deep down, he knew the Bee Gees weren't just a band, they were his anchor. Without them, everything felt unsteady. By mid-1970, rumors had turned to headlines. The BBC ran segments titled "The Gibb Family Feud." Journalists described the situation as irreconcilable. Robin was said to be refusing to reunite, while Barry reportedly told friends he was done chasing ghosts. Even Maurice began to break under the pressure. He told reporters that he missed the laughter most of all, that it wasn't about money or fame, it was about three boys who'd forgotten how to be brothers. Still, there were whispers of hope. In quiet moments, both Barry and Robin would hint at missing each other. Robin once said on air, "I think one day we'll find our way back. You can't break what was made in blood." And Barry, when asked if he'd ever forgive Robin, just smiled and said, "Forgiveness isn't the problem, it's pride." But at that time, forgiveness was far away. The Bee Gees' name belonged to Barry now, and Robin was determined to prove he didn't need that name to survive. The stage was set for the inevitable confrontation, the one moment that would either destroy the brothers forever or force them to face the truth. Neither of them wanted to admit that beneath all the rivalry, all the jealousy, and all the fame was just love. A love too stubborn to say sorry first. No one knows the exact moment it happened. There are stories, dozens of them, but all share one thing, a silence that felt like finality. It was sometime in early 1969. The Bee Gees were recording at IBC Studios in London. The tension had been growing for weeks, whispers behind the console, notes thrown away, and looks that said more than any lyric ever could. Maurice tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes between takes. But Barry and Robin barely looked at each other. When the red light turned on, they became professionals. When it turned off, strangers. One engineer later said, "You could feel it before you heard it. Something was about to break." They were working on a track called First of May, a gentle, emotional song about childhood, Barry's song, his lyrics, his lead vocal. But Robin thought Lamplight should have been the single instead. His song, his voice. That disagreement became the spark. Some claim Robin had already been told by the label that First of May was chosen because Barry sang it. Others say he found out that morning and didn't take it well. He reportedly stormed into the studio, slammed his lyric sheet on the piano, and said, "You can keep your song." Barry, usually calm, snapped back, "Then maybe you shouldn't be here." It wasn't shouted, it was whispered, but the whisper was enough. There's a version of the story that says Robin walked out without another word. Another that claims he turned, looked at his brother and said, "You've made this your band. Good luck with it." No one knows which version is true. What's confirmed is this: Robin left the studio that day and didn't come back. The rest of the band finished recording without him. Barry didn't chase him, Maurice didn't know what to say, and just like that, one of the most successful acts in music was suddenly broken. Not by fame, not by money, but by two brothers who couldn't find a way to share the same spotlight. For weeks, no one spoke publicly, but the silence didn't last. Robin started doing interviews, subtle at first, then sharper. He told one magazine, "I wasn't being heard, I was being managed." It didn't sound like bitterness, it sounded like betrayal. He released his solo single, Saved by the Bell, and fans immediately drew comparisons to Barry's voice. It was haunting, aching, as if Robin was singing directly to his brother. Barry, meanwhile, said nothing. He focused on moving forward. He told his team to keep recording, as if music could cover the sound of something breaking. But privately, people noticed he wasn't himself. He was quieter, more defensive. There were stories of him sitting in the studio long after everyone left, replaying old tracks from when all three brothers still sang together. For Barry, the break wasn't just professional, it was personal. He didn't just lose a bandmate, he lost the only person who could tell him he was wrong and make him listen. For Robin, the separation was supposed to be liberation, but freedom doesn't feel free when you have to keep explaining it. He was proud of his solo success, but every interview circled back to the same question: will you ever go back to the Bee Gees? And his answer changed each time. Sometimes yes, sometimes never. Sometimes silence. Maurice, the peacemaker, tried to fix it. He called Robin repeatedly, urging him to meet Barry, to talk it out, but neither wanted to be the first to bend. Pride had built a wall between them, and love was the only thing strong enough to break it, but neither one was ready to use it. There's an old rumor that one night, months after the split, Barry was driving alone and heard Saved by the Bell on the radio. He pulled over, rolled the window down, and just listened. Not as a rival, but as a brother. He didn't say a word, but the look on his face, one friend later said, looked like he'd realized too late that Robin wasn't his enemy. The years that followed were uneasy. They both had successes, but something was missing. Their names were still tied together in every headline: Barry's Bee Gees, Robin's revenge. The public loved the drama, but for the brothers, it was a wound that wouldn't close. By late 1970, both were exhausted, tired of pretending they didn't miss the sound of the other's voice. Behind the scenes, Maurice kept pushing. He told them both, "You don't have to forgive each other, just sing." And eventually, they did. The reunion was quiet. No press, no grand apology. Just three brothers in a studio again, trying to remember how to sound like family. But those who were there said it was never quite the same. Something in Barry's eyes had changed. Something in Robin's smile had faded. The fight was over, but the silence it created stayed with them forever. For years, the world only had rumors, stories traded in fan clubs and late-night interviews. Barry's ambition versus Robin's pride, a fight that left the Bee Gees split down the middle. But the truth, the one that came out slowly, piece by piece, was more human than anyone expected. After months of silence, the brothers reunited, not because of money, not because of management, but because of Maurice. He couldn't stand watching his family crumble. He told them bluntly, "You're both too stubborn to admit you miss each other. So Barry and Robin met privately, no reporters, no producers, just two brothers in a quiet room, face to face for the first time since the walkout. No one knows exactly what was said, but insiders recall that there were no apologies, no shouting, just long pauses, and the sound of two people finally realizing how much time they'd wasted. They didn't talk about contracts or singles, they talked about being kids again, singing in the dark, writing songs before anyone cared who led. That was enough. They walked out that night together, and the Bee Gees were reborn. In later years, Barry would admit it, carefully but honestly. He said the split in 1969 was about control, that Robin wanted his own identity and I couldn't let go of mine. He didn't call it a feud, he called it a mistake of love. Robin, too, softened with time. He told a BBC interviewer, "We were both right and both wrong." That's what brothers do. They never liked to revisit those years, but every time the subject came up, you could see it. The flicker in their eyes, the recognition that something precious had almost been lost forever. The rumors never stopped, though. Even after their comeback, fans could still sense tension. Interviews where Robin's expression changed whenever Barry spoke too long. Award shows where Barry thanked Robin and Robin barely nodded. It wasn't hate, it was memory, the kind that never fades, even after forgiveness. But when tragedy struck, when they lost Andy and later Maurice, all the pride, all the competition, all the noise vanished. Barry once said quietly, "After Maurice died, Robin and I stopped arguing. There was nothing left to prove." That's when he started speaking about the past differently, not as a scandal, but as a lesson. He admitted that fame had made them forget how to be brothers, and that if he could go back, he would have told Robin one thing sooner: "You were always right about the music. It wasn't mine, it was ours." In the final years of Robin's life, the two grew close again. They didn't need to say much. A look, a nod, a shared memory was enough. But when Robin passed in 2012, Barry's silence returned, deeper than before. At one concert, he started performing "I Started a Joke," Robin's song. I started to cry, which started the whole. Halfway through, he stopped. The crowd went silent, and when he finally spoke, his voice broke as he said, "I can't hear it without hearing him." He didn't have to explain. Everyone already knew. Today, when Barry talks about the Bee Gees, he calls their story a blessing and a burden. He admits there were rivalries, that words were said in anger, but insists it all came from love, a love that was too strong to handle gently. The confirmed story is simple. Yes, Robin left the Bee Gees in 1969. Yes, it was because of a fight about leadership, about ego, about who got to sing the hit single. But the part history often forgets is that they found their way back to each other. Because the Bee Gees were never about who sang the loudest. They were about what happened when those voices met in the same breath. In the end, there was no villain. Just two brothers who couldn't find the right way to say, "I need you." The world heard their harmonies, but they heard each other's silence, and maybe that's why their music still hurts to hear, even after all these years. Because beneath the perfection, beneath the fame, beneath every note that made the world dance, was a secret that never left the studio. They weren't singing for each other. They were singing to each other. Apologies turned into melody. Forgiveness hidden inside the chorus. When asked about Robin one final time, Barry didn't talk about the fame or the records. He just said, "He was my brother. That's all that ever mattered." Then he looked away, and for a moment, that same silence returned. The one that started in 1969 and still lingers whenever you hear their songs today. He never wanted to lead. He just didn't know how to stop. And that, more than anything, was the real story of Barry and Robin Gibb. A rivalry born from love, and a silence that became their truest harmony.